So once again, here's my non-live live stream. I'm starting at 16:10 on the 12th of December, Friday the 12th of December. I'm sitting here in my onesie because it's I don't want to put the heating on. I've just put the heating on, but only to dry my laundry because I've got the wax off my dress now and washed it. So, a lot of people iron fabric to get wax off it, with paper on it. It doesn't work on every fabric though. So, what I do is, I put the piece of fabric that's got the wax on it in a bowl, and then I cover it with bicarbonate of soda, and then I pour boiling water over it, and that gets the wax out every time. I was sacristan, you see. I had to get a lot of wax off vestments and servers' robes and stuff like that, and it's the best way to do it. Chapter 23 begins the discussion of the intellectual apprehensions that come in a purely spiritual way. Tells what they are. 1. Though our doctrine on the intellectual apprehensions that come from the senses is somewhat brief in comparison with what it ought to be, I have not wanted to enlarge on the matter any more. I believe, rather, that my explanation has been longer than necessary in view of the goal I have in mind, which is to liberate the intellect from these apprehensions and direct it to the night of faith. Now we will embark on a discussion of those other 4 kinds of intellectual apprehensions: visions, revelations, locutions, and spiritual feelings. In chapter 10, we called these apprehensions purely spiritual because they are not communicated to the intellect through the corporeal senses, as are the imaginative corporeal visions. They are clearly, distinctly, and supernaturally imparted to the intellect, without any of these exterior or interiorly bodily senses serving as means, and this is done passively, that is, without the soul's positing any act, at least through its own effort. I forgot to mention that the reason I've got all my slow gin in front of the thing there is because I'm going to bottle it in the next couple of days. 2. Let it be known that in a broad sense these 4 kinds of apprehensions can all be titled visions of the soul, because we also call the understanding of the soul its vision. And insofar as all these apprehensions are intelligible, they are called spiritually visible. There's a footnote here. John adopts the scholastic terminology that considers the apprehensive action of the intellect to be like a vision. In a way analogous to the vision of the bodily eye, the intellect sees what it understands or grasps, hence he speaks of the intellectual vision. Accordingly, the understanding formed from them in the intellect can be termed intellectual vision. The objects of the other senses, of sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, are objects of the intellect, insofar as they bear relation to truth or falsehood. And just as all that is corporeally visible to the material eye causes corporeal vision, so all that is intelligible to the intellect, the spiritual eye of the soul, causes spiritual vision. For, as we said, understanding an object is seeing it. Thus, speaking generally, we can call these 4 apprehensions visions. This could not be done with the other senses, because none of them is capable of perceiving the object as such of any of the others. 3. But since these apprehensions reach the soul in ways similar to those of the other senses, we can, properly and specifically speaking, apply the term vision to whatever the intellect receives in a manner resembling sight, because the intellect can see objects spiritually just as the eyes can corporeally. And what the intellect receives, as though by learning and understanding something new, just as the ears do on hearing what has never been never before been heard, we call revelation. And what it receives in a way similar to hearing we call elocution. And what it receives after the manner of the other senses, such as the knowledge of a sweet spiritual fragrance, spiritual savour, or spiritual delight that the soul can enjoy supernaturally, we call spiritual feelings. The intellect derives knowledge or spiritual vision from all these communications, without the apprehension of any form, image, or figure of the natural imagination or fantasy. For these experiences are bestowed immediately upon the soul by a supernatural work and by supernatural means. There's a footnote here. John speaks of spiritual experiences analogous to sense experiences. He completes his classification and application in chapter 32. Doctrine about the spiritual senses goes back to Origen and Gregory of Nyssa. We find references to these senses in Augustine and the Cistercian mystics, but it is in the theology of Bonaventure that doctrine on the spiritual senses is fully integrated into a system. John's poetic symbols frequently bear the influence of his experiences that came as though through spiritual senses. And then it says, compare, for example, Cantico 14 to 15. For, as was the case with the imaginative corporeal apprehensions, we must disencumber the intellect of these spiritual apprehensions by guiding and directing it past them into the spiritual night of faith, to divine and substantial union with God, lest the solitude and denudation concerning all things, which is a requisite for this union, be impeded by the hindrance and weakness of these apprehensions. But be impeded by the hindrance and weakness these apprehensions occasion. These apprehensions are nobler, safer, and more advantageous than the imaginative corporeal visions, because they are already interior, purely spiritual, and less exposed to the devil's meddling. They are more purely and delicately communicated to the soul, and involve none of its own work or imagination, at least not active work. Nonetheless, through lack of caution, and by treading such a path, the intellect might be not merely encumbered, but highly deceived. 5. As a general conclusion, we could give the same counsel for these 4 kinds of apprehensions that we accorded for the others. They should be the object of neither our aims nor our desires. Yet it can be worthwhile to discuss these apprehensions in particular, in order to explain some points about each of them, and shed more light on the practice of this counsel. And so, we will deal with the first kind, the spiritual or intellectual visions. Chapter 24. 2 kinds of supernatural spiritual visions. 1. Speaking properly now of spiritual visions, those that exclude the bodily senses, I find that there are 2 kinds relating to the intellect, those of corporeal substances and those of separate or incorporeal substances. The corporeal visions deal with the material things of heaven and earth. The soul, even while in the body, can see these objects by means of a certain supernatural light derived from God that bestows the power of seeing all heavenly and earthly objects that are absent. We read of such a vision in chapter 21 of the Apocalypse, where St. John relates the description and excellence of the heavenly Jerusalem that he beheld as it descended from heaven. We also read that St. Benedict viewed the entire world in a spiritual vision. St. Thomas, in the first Quod Libetum, affirms that this vision was received through a light from above, as we stated. There's a footnote. See St. Gregory the Great, Dialogues 2:35, in Migne, or Minier, PL 66, 198. Aquinas, Quod Libetum, 1:1, add 1. 2. The other visions, those of incorporeal substances, cannot be seen by means of this light derived from God, but by another, higher light, called the light of glory. These visions of incorporeal substances, angels and souls, do not occur in this life, nor can we, while in this mortal body, view such substances. If God should desire to let the soul see these substances essentially, as they are in themselves, it would immediately depart from the body and be loosed from this mortal life. God, when asked to show his essence, proclaimed to Moses, "Non videbit me homo et vivet." No human person can see me and be able to remain alive. Exodus 33:20. When the children of Israel thought they were going to see God, or that they had seen him or some angel, they were afraid of dying. We read of this in Exodus, where they fearfully exclaimed, "Non loquatur nobis Dominus, ne forte moriamur." May God not openly communicate himself to us, lest we die. Exodus 20:19. In the book of Judges we read also that Manoah, Samson's father, thinking he and his wife had seen in its essence the angel that had appeared to them as a most handsome man, declared to his wife, "Morte moriemur, quia vidimus Dominum." We shall die because we have seen the Lord. Judges 13:22. 3. These visions do not occur in this life, unless in some rare cases and in a transient way. In such an instance, through a dispensation of the natural law, God preserves the nature and life of the individual, abstracts the spirit entirely, and by his own power supplies the natural functions of the soul toward the body. When, as is the opinion, St. Paul saw them, the separated substances in the third heaven, he accordingly declared, "Sive in corpore, sive extra corpus nescio, Deus skit," that he was carried up to them and does not know if he saw them while in the body or out of the body. God knows. 2 Corinthians 12:2 and 4. Clearly he was transported above the ways of our natural life through the intervention of God. Also, when God, as is believed, revealed his essence to Moses, he declared he would place Moses in the cleft of the rock and cover him with his right hand to protect him from death when the divine glory passed by. This passing indicates both God's transitory manifestation of himself and the concomitant preservation with his right hand of Moses' natural life. Exodus 33:22. Such substantial visions as those of St. Paul, Moses, and our father Elijah, when he covered his face at the whistling of the gentle breeze of God, 1 Kings 19:11-13, even though transitory, occur rarely or hardly ever, and to only a few. For God imparts this kind of vision only to those who are very strong in the spirit of the church and God's law, as were these three. 4. Though these spiritual substances cannot be unclothed and seen clearly in this life by the intellect, they can nonetheless be left in the substance of the soul by the most delightful touches and conjunctions. These pertain to the category of spiritual feelings, which with God's help we will discuss later. There's a footnote here. The touches were not included in classifying the spiritual feelings in chapter 23:3. John mentions them now for the first time. Belonging to spiritual feelings, they are experienced in the substance of the soul. He plans a special discussion of them, but unfortunately never realizes his plan. Nonetheless, he does speak of them in passing in many places, but one must be attentive. Not all the touches he speaks of are the same as the substantial touches. Compare chapter 26:4. For we are directing and guiding our pen towards these, that is, to the divine conjunction and union of the soul with the divine substance. We will speak about this when dealing with the vague or dark mystical knowledge, yet to be expounded, and treating of how, by means of this loving and obscure knowledge, God joins himself to the soul in a high and divine degree. In a way, this dark, loving knowledge, which is faith, serves as a means for divine union in this life, as does the light of glory for the clear vision of God in the next. There's a footnote here. John does not fulfill this promise to treat specifically of mystical knowledge. Here in passing he mentions the key themes of his entire work, union with God, the goal to which he is leading the soul. Mystical knowledge, the equivalent of both contemplation and the general or dark loving knowledge, faith, which is identified with this dark loving knowledge and serves as the means of union, just as the light of glory does for the beatific vision. When faith becomes a, quote, highly illumined faith, end quote, through its intensification or purification, it surpasses the general or dark loving knowledge spoken of in chapters 12 to 15. 5. Let us discuss now the visions of corporeal substances received spiritually in the soul in a way similar to that of bodily visions. As the eyes behold corporeal objects by means of natural light, so the intellect through supernatural light, as we said, sees interiorly these same objects, and others too according to God's wishes. The difference between the two kinds of visions lies in the mode and manner. Spiritual and intellectual visions are far clearer and more delicate than corporeal ones, for when God desires to bestow his favour upon a soul, he communicates that supernatural light we mentioned, so that through it the soul may behold with greater facility and clarity the earthly and heavenly objects he desires it to see. The absence or presence of these objects, then, is of no importance, nor does this hinder the vision. The vision takes place at times as though the door were opened and the soul could see, as it would if a flash of lightning were to illuminate the dark night, and momentarily make objects clearly and distinctly visible, only to leave them all in darkness again, although the forms and images of these objects would remain in the fantasy. This illumination takes place far more perfectly in the soul, for the objects seen in the light are so impressed on it that as often as it adverts to them, it beholds them as it did before, just as the forms reflected in a mirror are seen as often as one looks in it. And those objects of the soul's vision are impressed so strongly that they are never entirely removed, although in the course of time they do become somewhat more remote. 6. The effects these visions produce in the soul are quietude, illumination, happiness resembling that of glory, delight, purity, love, humility, and an elevation and inclination toward God. Sometimes these effects are more intense, sometimes less. Sometimes one effect predominates, at other times another. This diversity is due to the spirit that receives them and to God's wishes. 7. Through spiritual suggestion and by means of a certain natural light, the devil can also cause these visions in the soul, whether the objects be present or absent. The account in St. Matthew that tells of the devil showing Christ, omnia regna mundi et gloriam eorum, all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, Matthew 4:8, is explained by some doctors as an example of spiritual suggestion by the devil, because it would have been impossible for him to make Christ see with his bodily eyes all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. A great difference lies between diabolical and divine visions, for the effects of diabolical visions are unlike those produced by the divine. The devil's visions produce spiritual dryness in one's communion with God and an inclination to self-esteem, to admitting them and considering them important. In no way do they cause the mildness of humility and the love of God. Neither are the forms of these diabolical visions impressed with a delicate clarity upon the soul, as are the others. These impressed forms are not lasting, but are soon obliterated from the soul, except when its esteem causes a natural remembrance of them, but the memory of them is considerably arid, and does not produce the love and humility caused by the remembrance of the good visions. 8. These visions cannot serve the intellect as approximate means for union with God, because they deal with creatures, which bear no proportion or essential conformity to God. Consequently, to advance by the proximate means, which is faith, a person should behave in a purely negative way, as with the other visions we mentioned. Souls should not store up treasure souls should not store up or treasure the forms of these visions impressed within. Neither should they have the desire to cling to them. In doing so, they would impede themselves by what dwells within them, those forms, images, and figures of persons, and they would not journey to God through the negation of all things. Though these forms remain impressed within the soul, they are not a great impediment if one is unwilling to pay heed to them, even if the remembrance of these visions really does stir the soul to some contemplation, love of God. Denudation, pure faith, and darkness regarding them will stir and elevate it much more, and without its knowing how or whence this elevation comes. It will happen that a person will be enkindled with anxieties of very pure love without knowing their origin or foundation. The reason for this is that just as faith is infused and rooted more deeply in the soul by means of that emptiness, darkness, and nakedness regarding all things, or by spiritual poverty, which are all the same, so too the charity of God is simultaneously infused and deeply rooted in the soul. The more individuals desire darkness and annihilation of themselves regarding all visions, exteriorly and interiorly receivable, the greater will be the infusion of faith and consequently of love and hope, since these three theological virtues increase together. 9. But a person does not always grasp or feel this love, because it does not reside with tenderness in the senses, but resides in the soul with properties of strength and of greater courage and daring than before, though at times it overflows into the senses, imparting a gentle and tender feeling. Accordingly, to attain that love, happiness, and joy caused and produced in the soul by these visions, individuals should possess fortitude, mortification, and love so as to remain in emptiness and darkness regarding all creatures. They should base their love and joy on what they neither see nor feel, nor are capable of seeing or feeling. That is, upon God, who is incomprehensible and transcendent. This is why it behooves us to go to God through the negation of all. Even if individuals are so shrewd, humble, and strong that the devil is unable to deceive them by these visions, or make them, as he usually does, fall into any presumption, the visions will be an obstacle to their advancement if they fail to practice this denial, since visions are an impediment to spiritual nakedness, poverty of spirit, and emptiness in faith. These are the requisites for union with God. 10. Since the same doctrine we taught about supernatural sensory visions and apprehensions in chapters 19 and 20 is valid also for these visions, we will not spend any more time here in their discussion. There's a footnote here saying the reference should be chapters 17 and 18. Chapter 16 also deals with this topic. I might stop there. I'll just look at how long. So chapter 25 follows, which is very short. And then chapter 26 follows, which is very long. And so I could read chapter 25, but it starts on that page there, and there's chapter 26. And I just think when I come to it tomorrow, I'll be confused about what I read already. If I read chapter 25, so I'm just going to leave it there. Rowan Williams has tried to manipulate me before. For a long time before I even knew he was obsessed with me, which I only realised after I started researching him. He's got some kind of the magical thinking that very small children have. This is one reason why I've always said, when I've been making videos and that he's fixated in a state of infancy. Because he thinks he only has to say something and it automatically comes true. And he thought, he had the attitude, I think, that he could manipulate me into doing what he wanted. Even though I had no idea at all that he was obsessed with me and that he was employing these manipulative tactics, because he was of no interest to me whatsoever. I mean, I met him when I was 23. And as I've said before, one of the things that struck me was how enormously immature he was. And that was when he was in his early 40s and I was 23. And his immaturity was very striking to me. The first time I had a long conversation with him. And he was sold in Wales as this, and elsewhere as well. I mean, but I was in Wales, and he came to Wales, and it was like the Messiah was coming. That's the way he was presented, and he was supposed to be also some kind of genius, and he could see like the crux of the matter on any issue, and he was going to save the church and save Christianity and everything. Just unimaginable. The esteem that was attached to him when he came to Wales. And I just never saw it. And I kept thinking, like, I must be missing something because everybody's saying he's really amazing and really massively intelligent. And he just wasn't. I never saw it. And all this time later, that was in 1992, I met him for the first time. And so all this time later, I'm still waiting to see this alleged genius. The only thing he's a genius at is trying to manipulate the outcome he wants. So everything he says now, and way he tries to manipulate me now, he's done it all before. Every single thing. He's incapable of anything new. And I said a long time ago that I would know when all of this was coming to an end, because Rowan Williams would suddenly start confessing. Because there's no remorse or contrition in his act of confessing. It's just that he considers that to be the best strategy for getting the outcome that he wants. So, when he's exhausted all other options and still not got what he wanted, he's going to start confessing. That's what I said he would do. Years ago I said that. So, I also said that he would commit suicide when it came to the point where he couldn't evade justice any longer. And I made a whole video about that, and if I can find it on my YouTube channel, I will. Because, you know, I'm competent to assess mental health, because that's what I did. And there's an assessment tool for assessing mental health, and there were 2 points on it that I referred to. One is like, you assess for the person the reasons for living and the reasons for dying. Of course, you can never 100% accurately predict these things, but in the case of Rowan Williams, I've been studying him for so long from afar. I think the likelihood of him not committing suicide is very remote because he's extremely narcissistic. And the fact that he's gone to such massive efforts to destroy me because I didn't want sex with him, it's just completely ridiculous. It's ridiculous. A ridiculous overreaction. He simply cannot tolerate any form of narcissistic injury. He couldn't have just thought, well, she's a total bitch and she's not that great anyway, and I can do a lot better than her. He could have thought that, you know, considering that he was already married, and there's like 4 billion other women in the world, or whatever. He could have thought that. But no, he can't tolerate even the slightest narcissistic injury from anybody. And this is why he had to go around telling everyone I was a lesbian, because the idea that I might be heterosexual and not be wanting to jump into bed with him, it's just more than he can tolerate. It's the most pathetic man I've ever met in my whole life. Really. So, it just makes me laugh, he's so pathetic. But anyway, he's had to go to this massive effort to defend his ego. And when it comes to the point where he can't pretend any longer, when he's definitely not going to get what he wants, he simply cannot tolerate the narcissistic injurer. And so, if it ever comes to the point where the judicial system says he's guilty, says to everybody in all the world that he's not the person he says he is, and then sends him to jail, well, how's he going to cope with that then, since he can't even cope with the fact that I didn't want to have sex with him? Even though he was like nearly 20 years older than me and already married to somebody else. So, it's my opinion that he will have no reason for living. There was another thing out of this suicide assessment. I can't remember what it is now. There was another reason why I thought that he would commit suicide. Not simply that his reasons for dying would outweigh his reasons for living. There was another particular thing as well, but it's just gone out of my head. So if I find it... Oh yeah, well, yes, making preparations for death. You see, when someone feels or says that they want to kill themselves, it doesn't necessarily follow through, because every day I'm wanting to kill myself. And it's been like that now. Since the worst of the gang stalking started. And I haven't got any reason for living at all. Because every day is total hell and they won't leave me alone. And, but the thing is, like, when I say I've got no reason for living, I'm talking about in a temporal, materialistic way, that I have no reason for living. Because it's my conviction, though, my strong conviction, that it's a mortal sin to take my own life, because only God can decide to give or to take life. And he's more important to me, his will is more important to me than my own will. And this has stopped me from killing myself. So that's the reason I've got for living. I haven't got any other reason. It's the reason I've got for not killing myself. But so if somebody says like they want to kill themselves or they feel suicidal, it doesn't follow that they're going to kill themselves, at least not imminently. And people tend to panic when someone says that they want to kill themselves. Especially mental health services, because if someone tells you they want to kill themselves and you don't do anything about it, and then they actually go and kill themselves, then your head's going to be on the chopping block. So mental health services tend to overreact about this kind of thing as well. So you need to find out what they mean. Because very often when someone says that they want to end their life, they don't want to end their life, they just want to end their suffering. And if you can find a way to alleviate their suffering, or to help them develop coping strategies so that they're not suffering as much, or they're managing the suffering better until hopefully their circumstances improve, then you can avoid suicide by that. And people who struggle with suicidal feelings, including myself, will tell you that you can't prevent suicide. All you can do is delay it until beyond natural death. So, at the worst moment when all this gang stalking had started and I was really, really frightened and overwhelmed, I was really going to kill myself. And what I had to say to myself was, I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to do anything for 5 minutes. And delaying killing myself for 5 minutes alleviated the crisis. So that's one way of dealing with it. Like, you can say, it's hard to say I'm never going to kill myself in my entire life. Because your entire life might stretch for decades yet. But you can say, perhaps, I'm not going to kill myself in the next 5 minutes, or in the next hour, or until midnight tonight, I'm not going to kill myself. And that's one way of managing it. And the crisis does in fact pass, usually. So, people commit suicide impulsively. Sometimes. But this is a planned suicide that I'm talking about in relation to Rowan Williams. And the fact that he gave a speech. I've forgotten when it was, but it's in my video if I find it. And he was speaking about Lord Alton. writing letters to be found after his death. And it's my opinion that he wasn't talking about Lord Alton writing letters to be found after his death. It was Rowan Williams talking about letters he had written or was going to write to be found after his death, that is, i.e. suicide notes. So when someone is going to commit suicide and it's a planned suicide, they go around and say goodbye to people, write suicide notes, put their affairs in order, that kind of thing. And this is what I think he's done or is doing or will do. That he's going to write a suicide note blaming me for the fact that he decided entirely of his own free will to kill himself when he's been trying to drive me to suicide for decades. And as I've said before, there's absolutely no point. There's absolutely no point in trying to make me feel bad about him killing himself and like I should have relented and had sex with him, or I should have said that he was right about everything or something, in order to stop him from exercising his own free will. So I would advise him not to commit suicide, because the only thing it will achieve is arriving in hell quicker than he would have already. But it's not my problem. I'm not responsible for anything he does. He is entirely responsible for his own actions. He's entirely responsible for the situation that he's in at the moment. I've done absolutely nothing to cause it. I didn't even know it was going on for the longest amount of time. It was going on completely without my knowledge. And there's absolutely no way on this earth that I'm doing anything to make the situation of his life different from what it is. I'm not responsible for him. I didn't even choose all of this. I don't care whether he's in jail or out of jail. I just wanted him out of my life. The best thing they could have done for me was to tell me what he'd been doing, and then I would have understood all the things that had been happening. That he'd been going around turning people against me and so forth. The best thing they could have done from my point of view would have been just to tell me that, stop him from doing it in the future and let me move on. That would have been the best thing. But instead they've put me through all of this, the British state, because it all started in 2004 when Tony Blair was in power, to try and discredit me and get him off the hook and save the New World Order. So I've not had any say in this situation that Rowan Williams is in. And if he thinks it's a very bad thing that's going on, it's the one thing I agree with him about. I didn't choose it. Other people chose it. But they chose it under his direction. Everything that's happened to me has been under his direction. Like being kidnapped by the state and so forth. I'm never going to capitulate. He just needs to face himself and repent of his sins. His salvation is not dependent on me in the slightest. So he needs to turn to Christ and repent of his sins and stop playing the victim and stop trying to manipulate his victim. Because I'm not going to be manipulated. And as I said in videos before as well, don't bother writing any suicide notes addressed to me because I won't be reading them. And there is no situation in which I would consider myself in any way responsible for a decision he takes to kill himself. Because he's a grown-up, he has free will. And if he makes that decision, which I advise against, then that's entirely his choice and nothing to do with me whatsoever. I haven't chosen anything about this situation. I didn't choose that he be controlling everyone behind my back for decades, trying to destroy me just to save his gigantic ego. So it's his problem, not mine. And he doesn't need me in order to be saved by Christ. He can just turn to Christ. He needs to forget about me altogether. I'm absolutely nothing to do with him. I don't want anything to do with him. I'm never going to have anything to do with him. So there's no point keep repeating the same manipulative crap over and over again. It will never achieve anything. He needs God, not me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. So the time now is 16:51 on the 12th of December 2025.